I don't think I need to describe what Family Guy is to anyone who's watching this video. Family Guy is one of the longest running adult animation shows in the Western world. Over its long run, it's managed to cultivate a die-hard fanbase who love the characters and the stories from the show. It has also been quite a controversial show over the years as well, which is why the cancellation of the game Family Guy Road to Death is so ironic. Family Guy Road to Death was intended to be a third-person zombie shooter, which was, in part, intended to parody other zombie shooters like Call of Duty Zombies and Left 4 Dead. The game was to feature numerous popular characters from the franchise, fighting against zombie hordes with both firearms and a melee combat system. The game was intended to have a campaign mode, which would have featured ample Family Guy episode-styled gags, and an online multiplayer mode with game modes like Deathmatch. The game was in development by a studio named Heavy Iron, who are best known for their work on SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom and assisting development on a handful of Call of Duty games. The suggestion to make a zombie shooter was apparently given to them by Fox Interactive higher-ups themselves, which led to them beginning development on a playable build of the concept, which initially took 6 months to create. The first iteration of Family Guy Road to Death was shelved after Seth MacFarlane, the creator of the show and voice of many main characters, apparently objected to the violent and dark content of the game. Developers from Heavy Iron claimed he would go on multiple tirades about the build they had provided to Fox, which led to the first build being shelved. A second build with less violence and objectionable themes that was based off of the prior build was created to try and placate MacFarlane. However, he also objected to this version as well, for what are theorised to be similar reasons. A third version of the game was developed with members of the Family Guy writing team directly involved, but the zombie shooter aspects of the game were removed, as the title was repurposed into the game Family Guy Back to the Multiverse, which would actually release on the PS3 and the Xbox 360. One of the builds of Road to Death were donated to the Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas, and 2 trailers for the game exist, but no other playable builds of this project originally exist. The story of Road to Death is a strange example of when a creator vetoes a project due to disagreements with the development team. Although it's definitely not the only example of these conflicts taking place in the games industry. Gambling Apocalypse Kaiji, or simply known as Kaiji, is a manga and anime series that follows the title character Kaiji Ito as he's forced to partake in mentally and physically challenging games in order to clear his debt with a loan company and the Yakuza. As a big fan of both Kaiji as a character and the story, I always thought it would make a great game series, and while a few attempts to bring the tension and thriller elements of Kaiji to the gaming realm have been made, to mixed results, a handful of lost Kaiji games do exist, and are almost completely lost save for a few screenshots. Famous arcade game and toy company Taito, along with the manga and anime juggernaut Kodansha, worked in partnership from 2003 to 2009 in order to create numerous simple Java-based games off of some of Kodansha's largest and most beloved series, along with some ports of Taito's classic arcade games and even some completely new, never-before-seen titles. Among these games were a handful of Kaiji titles. The first game was called Limited Rock Paper Scissors, which was based off of the first arc of the Kaiji manga, an arc where Kaiji and hundreds of other competitors are forced to play a modified version of Rock Paper Scissors called Restricted Rock Paper Scissors. From the images we have access to, it appears that this title may have featured both dialogue and gameplay, which implies that it may have featured a simple retelling of the first arc of the manga. The player also has access to a gameplay mechanic called Fake, which probably had something to do with cheating or manipulating the opponent, something that is a big aspect of Kaiji. This simple game seems to have been available on a most likely short-lived service named Comics Games iKodansha, which might have served as a subscription service for monthly users. A second game in the series based off the second arc of the story was released, revolving around a challenge where Kaiji and others must cross a steel beam suspended between two skyscrapers without falling or touching the bar with his hands. The player would have to also maintain balance on the bar while wind blows between the buildings, replicating one of the major moments during this challenge in the story. A final game based off a ladder arc in the story was to feature both traditional mahjong and a dice game called Chinchirorin. These games were to range in cost between 300 and 350 yen each. It's not very much uncommon for games to release on subscription services to become lost media, especially when they are primarily exclusive to specific regions and on such unusual hardware. Seeing how difficult it can be to research some of these games and services from the past, the Kaiji games are definitely not the only titles lost from these services. I mean, even when Sega titles can be lost, when Sega also ran one of these subscription services for old Java-based hardware, it's obvious that even Kodansha titles are going to go missing in some way. F1 Racing Championship 2 was a sim racing game in development by a studio called Video System, and was in roads to be published by Ubisoft for the PlayStation 2 and PC. The game would have simulated the 2000s F1 season, and would have featured licensed cars such as Ferrari, McLaren Mercedes and Williams BMW, and would have also featured real drivers such as Rubens Barrichello, Eddie Irvine and Jenson Button. One of the game's major selling points was the realistic recreations of the season's tracks and cars, by using satellite and telemetry data to provide a far greater level of racing accuracy than the previous game in the series. The reason behind the game's cancellation is not entirely known, as no guaranteed reason has ever been given. However, it is speculated that a dispute between publisher Ubisoft and the governing body of Formula 1, the FIA, over an inclusion of a multiplayer mode in the game saw Ubisoft losing the rights to the F1 license before release. Breaking Bad is one of the most beloved television programs ever made, following the story of Walter White and Jesse Pinkman as they get deeper and deeper into the drug-dealing underworld. Walt's Warning was an interactive video browser game that was produced to advertise the second season of the show in 2009, and saw Bryan Cranston appear as Walter White. The game took place from a first-person perspective, and saw the player getting kidnapped by Walter in the middle of the desert. The player then wakes up in the RV from the show and is exposed to a long diatribe by Walter. The player has control over the camera's movement and can choose to focus on a handful of different items in the scene, such as a gun. Choosing to look at a specific prop for long enough will affect how the game ends for the player. At the start of the game, the player is instructed to upload a picture of themselves or their friends, write their location and their name, and all of these elements were then incorporated into the game in a pretty immersive way. Walt's Wisdom was the first of these two games that was released, and was used to advertise the first season. While the game is more basic than Walt's Warning, it also allowed the player to provide their name and email address, although the player didn't have any control over the camera this time. In this version, Walter gives the player some heartfelt advice to achieve something with their life and not waste their time on Earth. He laments the fact that while he waited until he was too old and missed out on many chances, the player is relatively young and still has time to genuinely do something. While these two games are pretty simple, they are also really cool and immersive games that not only serve to perfectly outline the plot of each season of Breaking Bad as a whole, but also perfectly outline the drastic change in character that Walter White goes through during the show. Being a Flash game and Flash being discontinued, both Walt's wisdom and Walt's warning have been lost, as the files that are available don't include the full game. An unfortunate fate for a lot of old and unarchived Flash games.
Well, I let life pass me by too. 50 years before I could truly say I am awake. Look, you're only in your 30s, you still have time to change. So whatever you can do, or want to do, or dream that you can do, start doing it right away, because there is nothing more dangerous in life than not living.
The incredibly popular first-person shooter franchise Call of Duty was at one point in time going to venture into the realm of real-time strategy with the lost title Call of Duty Tactics. This lost game was unearthed in 2012 when a Twitter user stumbled across the online art portfolio of an animator named Steve Nelson. Amongst the portfolio was evidence of a lost and unannounced Call of Duty title named Call of Duty Tactics, which was at one point in time in development by a studio named Vicarious Visions. This makes sense as Vicarious Visions, who you may recognise from their work on the Tony Hawk games, was acquired and owned by Activision at the time. From the info that is available, Call of Duty Tactics would have been a first for the series, as it would have broken the trend of first-person shooters in favour of real-time tactics-based strategy. The game would also be set to take place in World War II, which would have seen the series return to its roots. At this time, Vicarious Visions was also said to be working on another Call of Duty title named Call of Duty Roman Wars, which from what is known would have been a mixture between top-down real-time strategy and melee combat set in ancient Rome. Vicarious Visions would go on to some pretty major success in the field of Skylanders and other peripheral-focused gaming ventures, yet the cancellation of Call of Duty Tactics and Roman Wars is quite unfortunate, as these two games, especially the Roman one, would have been very interesting additions to the Call of Duty series. The reason for their cancellation has never been truly confirmed, but theories state that Activision meddling and a want to keep the Call of Duty brand from becoming overrepresented in the market of gaming have been posed. No builds or version of either of these titles have been released or found. Theoretically, few film franchises would be better suited to a video game adaptation than the Fast and Furious series. However, these films are home to some of the most notoriously awful racing games ever made. However, in 2003, a development studio with some pretty major racing game chops was developing a street racing title based off of the first two films in the franchise. Studio Genki, who is most well known for the Tokyo Extreme Racer series, which is an awesome series of games by the way, was handling development of the title, which was set to be released on both Xbox and PlayStation. The game was set to take place in Los Angeles and would have featured both licensed cars and body kits, amongst other modifications. The game would have followed the formula of the player building a reputation on the streets from scratch in the racing underworld, and would have most likely featured some characters and vehicles from the game. From the very little gameplay footage that is available, it can be assumed that a police system would have also been included as well. The game also appears to have a built-in MP3 system with licensed songs, one of which is a song by the band Saliva as seen in the gameplay footage. No real reason has ever been given as to why this game was never released, and to this day the Genki Fast and Furious movie tie-in has never surfaced in a playable state. This footage is all that exists of the game to this day. I know this was a relatively short entry into the video, but sometimes lost media is just very short, and in some cases that's the most interesting stuff. You know, you barely know anything about it. It was a blip on the radar at one point in time, and then it completely ceases to exist forevermore. A bit unfortunate, because I do really like Genki games, but, you know, what can you do? That's the way the cookie crumbles, I guess.